Luca, disrupting bipartite trading networks, matching for revenue maximization. In large part, this paper is motivated by online platforms and the ways in which online platforms disrupt existing markets by facilitating transaction. So before I get started, just right at the moment to shout out my co-authors, Yannai, Gonczarowski, Qiurui, and David Parks. And you probably don't tell you this again, but online platforms are important, right? They were especially important during COVID when they sort of facilitated transactions that wouldn't have been possible without in-person contact. So here's a graph of meal delivery and their sales over time. So you see this like during COVID. You also see that now we're more reliant on these food delivery platforms than ever. You see a similar trend. This is the percentage of retail sales that occur via e-commerce platforms. And again, the same spike during COVID. And again, the same persistent trend. So COVID may have highlighted the importance of these online platforms, but they really are becoming an increasingly important part of the modern economy. So how should we think about these platforms? At least for the context of this talk, we're going to be thinking about them as disrupting an existing market. So they join an existing market by introducing new users to each other, by facilitating new transaction opportunities. And so what do I mean by that? Take customers in restaurants on DoorDash, right? I, as a customer, might know some local restaurants, but maybe I don't know some other restaurants. Maybe some restaurants are just too far away for me to normally buy from. Well, DoorDash connects me with those restaurants. Same thing, I know sellers, right, that are local to me, but Amazon connects me with sellers. So that's great, right? Platforms are great for facilitating those social transactions. But, right, if we were a social planner and we wanted to maximize welfare, what I would want the platform to do is to introduce me to all the sellers, right? Introduce all buyers to all sellers, then let us trade for you. But what might actually end up happening is that platforms are revenue maximizing. And so there might actually be incentives that don't align with welfare maximization. So there might be cases in which a platform might want to suppress certain transaction opportunities, suppress certain introductions in order to raise its own revenues. So how might that happen? Well, right, we're thinking about platforms as controlling which buyers are made aware of which sellers. And this process has actually gone under a lot of regulatory scrutiny recently. In 2019, the EU Commission sued Amazon, alleging that Amazon was actually selectively favoring certain sellers over others in an effort to suppress competition and to raise its own revenues. Right? So because of that case and motivated by that case, a natural question to ask is how do platforms actually control this visibility in order to maximize their revenue? So take the following market, right? And suppose that the black edges represent transactions that are already possible without the platform, right? So the select buyer and the select seller happen to know each other and can transact, but the middle seller and the middle buyer know no one, right? So the platform can come in, facilitate a new transaction, right? And that's overall good for it. Right, so without a platform, we're missing out on some trading opportunities. But how should the platform actually make these introductions? How should it link buyers and sellers? Well, the welfare maximizing thing to do would be to connect everyone to everyone. Right now, everyone can trade, but what the platform actually doesn't want here is that we're introducing a lot of competition between sellers. Right now, all these sellers compete with the same buyers, and this has the unintended consequence of actually driving down prices. So if we assume that the platform's revenue is proportional to the sort of sales that occur on platform, this might be something the platform wants to avoid. And it might actually prefer something like this, right? It still facilitates a new transaction, but now it's limiting the competition between sellers, right? And in so doing, it's driving up prices and actually getting more. So this is what we're worried about. We're worried that platforms are suppressing information in order to raise their own revenues and actually hurting welfare. If they're motivated by these concerns, we're going to focus on the following questions. Firstly, how do platforms actually choose to introduce buyers and sellers? And then secondly, given that they do so, how do these incentives affect social welfare and what are the economic implications of revenue maximization? So to answer these questions, we're going to need some models of platform economy, and we're going to adopt the following model. So we're going to assume that there's a bipartite graph of n unit demand buyers and n unit supply sellers. So say these are the buyers and sellers on the right. And then they have some valuations. So buyer B sub I has valuation B sub ij for seller S sub j. Right. But why is this a graph? Where are the edges? Well, the edges are meant to represent the feasible transactions. So a buyer and a seller can only transact if they're connected by an edge. So don't treat these valuations as edges. These dashed lines are only there to represent the valuations. So where do the edges actually come from? Well, they come from two places. Firstly, right, we're assuming this platform is disrupting an existing market. So there's some transactions that are already possible without the platform, and these are to be captured by world edges. These are what we call world edges, or solid edges in black. And we're going to call this whole thing, right? So the buyers, the sellers, the world edges, and the valuations, that's going to be termed the world graph, right? That's the market before the platform intervenes. So the platform sees this world graph, and then it joins, and it adds platform edges, right? It introduces buyers to sellers. In this case, it adds the edge from buyer 2 to seller 2, and now we can pass present. Okay, finally, we're going to assume that the market clears according to a wall-region equilibrium with maximum comparative prices, and the platform's revenue is proportional to the sum of the prices of on-platform transactions. So what's going to happen here? Well, these are the transactions that are going to occur. And at these prices, which ones actually affect platform revenue? Well, only one transaction occurs on platform, namely the middle one. So the platform's revenue is going to be proportional to 4 in this case. So what we want, right, what the platform wants is to add the set of platform edges that actually maximizes their own. So they want to be wary of introducing too much competition in a sort of driving out process. So here's another way that the platform could actually introduce edges, right? On the left, this is what we saw before. But what happened if it did the welfare maximizing thing and added all the edges? Well, in this case, what would actually end up happening is that these exact same set of edges would transact. But instead of transacting buyer 2 and seller 2 at a price of 4 as before, now they transact at a price of 3. Right? So we're seeing how by adding more edges, how by introducing externalities between different sellers, by introducing competition, the platform actually drives down its prices and drives down its revenue. Right? So it turns out that the left thing is the optimal thing for the platform to do. Introduce just one edge, and that introducing too many buyers and too many sellers can actually have an adverse effect on platform. All right, so in the context of that model, let's take a moment to restate our goals. So the first question is, can we compute the revenue off the set of platform edges? Right? Given a world graph, which introduction should the platform make to maximize its own revenue? It turns out this problem is NP hard. So given that difficulty, we're going to ask what we can actually guarantee in polynomial time. And then secondly, what are the trade-offs between welfare and revenue? How does this affect customer welfare at the end of it? So we're not the first people to study platforms. There's a lot of related work. Maybe the two most similar papers to our own are papers by Banerjee et al. And Verge et al., who study similar platform revenue maximization problems. Banerjee et al. Study it in terms of market segmentation, which you can think of as very similar to our introduction to platform edges. And then Verge et al. Studied the problem of charging optimal commissions as a platform. There's also, what's the difference between their work and our work? Well, our work crucially depends on world edges. These world edges are going to represent outside options, and they're going to introduce a lot of complexity into the problem by causing externalities between different sellers and different types. Similarly, Grant, Meinhardt, and Elliott study problems of network formation games, and they characterize the wall-region equilibrium prices based on that network structure. So theirs are network formation games. Ours, there's a platform intermediary that's actually responsible for the creation of new edges in the model. But we're actually going to use sort of a lot of their techniques because the platform really cares about these prices as depending on the network structure, right? They form the network, so they're going to care how the prices evolve as sort of as they create this network via the introduction of platforms. So let's get into some results. But before we get into any specifics, let me just give you a high-level overview of what we'll present. So we're going to start off with some computational results, and I'm going to show you that in fact the problem is NP hard for the platform to precisely maximize its revenue. But then I'll give you some polytime special cases where the platform can actually do precise maximization in polynomial time. And it turns out that this is actually going to somewhat characterize, sort of up to some edge cases, the entirety of the landscape of the platform problem into two classes of problems that are easy and problems that are hard. So we're going to delineate the boundary of sort of tractability for the platform. And then given the hardest results, we're going to transition to giving polytime revenue and welfare definitions. So we're going to start off with a logarithmic approximation algorithm to optimal revenue when markets are initially inefficient, where I'll clarify what initially inefficient means later. And then I'm going to show you that even when the platform maximizes for revenue, things can't get too bad for participants. That in fact, we're guaranteed a logarithmic fraction of optimal welfare, even when the platform acts entirely selfish. And finally, I'll present some stronger results when we assume that goods are homogeneous. Okay, so starting off with the complexity of the platform's problem. So on the left, you'll see the structure of the world graph. Remember, these are the world edges and the buyer valuations. So this is the state of the market before the platform joins. In the middle, you see the class of valuations we're considering. And then on the right, you'll see whether it's NP hard or whether we can compute it in polynomial.
Right, so how are prices chosen?
Prices are chosen based, so the market clears according to a wall-region equilibrium with maximum comparative prices. So it turns out that even in pretty restricted classes and markets, already the platform problem presented So even when the world graph satisfies these conditions, so even where it's sparse, which is a technical condition you don't have to worry about, and even when buyers have degree at most 2, so they know at most 2 sellers via world edges, and additionally when valuations take this following form, so you can think about this as a buyer either not wanting a good, in which case it has value 0, or for any good it does want, it has the same valuation. So even in this specific setting, already the platform problem is empty hard. So there's a very limited sort of subset of cases where we could actually solve it efficiently. So you might think, okay, this looks really weird. Is this just the best thing that you could actually solve the problem for? Well, it turns out, no, in some sense, this represents exactly the boundary between intractable instances and tractable instances. So consider the following class of markets where we're removing the sparsity condition and now restricting the degree to at most 1 and then changing the valuation slightly. Already we get our polytime algorithm to compute the revenue optimal solution. Similarly, consider the exact same world graph structure as in our hardness result, but now only modify the valuations. Again, you get a polytime algorithm to compute the optimal solution. So in some sense, this really characterizes the sort of general class of problems into 2 cases that are hard and cases that are easy. So given those computational hardness results, what can I actually guarantee? This is 100% guaranteed, not going to get that, but I'll show you what we can get. So we're going to start off with maybe the most natural question after our hardness results, which is, can we design approximation algorithms for revenue? And this ties in with the question of sort of asking how platforms actually choose to introduce buyers and sellers. This is one approximate way that they could do so. So here's the general idea. Suppose that the platform can increase welfare by quite a bit by facilitating new transactions, but that really contributes to the welfare of the market. Is there a way somehow for the platform to translate this welfare increase into revenue for itself? Okay, that's the idea. And the answer, it turns out, is yes. And it's stated in the following theorem. So suppose that the platform can increase welfare by delta W by adding some set of K platform edges. Then it turns out the platform can guarantee revenue on the order of delta W over log K in polynomial time. So it can actually extract a logarithmic fraction of this welfare increase in polynomial time. So as an immediate corollary of this theorem, what we get is a logarithmic approximation algorithm for revenue in initially inefficient markets. So what do I mean by initially inefficient markets? Well, I mean markets where without the platform, we would have substantially less welfare than with the platform. So these are markets where the platform is actually extremely beneficial to the welfare of the markets. In these markets, the platform can actually, we have a logarithmic approximation algorithm for optimal revenue. So that's great, right? That answers some questions about revenue, but how about our main concern, which is welfare, right? We haven't answered this question. So to answer and to quantify the effects on social welfare, we're going to define the price of revenue maximization as follows. So it's going to be the maximum over all markets of the ratio between the optimal welfare and the welfare with platform. So think of this as the worst case ratio when the platform acts as a welfare maximizer compared to where it acts as a revenue maximizer, right? So this is really quantifying how much the platform choosing to pursue its revenue incentives can hurt welfare. So I've made a lot of fuss about how the platform might hide certain transactions, might suppress information in order to maximize its revenue. But so far, I actually haven't shown you a single market where welfare isn't optimal per platform. So here's one. Let's consider this market on the left. And what's the welfare optimal thing for the platform to do? Well, it's to add this diagonal edge. This would give welfare 2 and revenue just 1 to the platform. But the platform's a revenue maximizer, right? So what's a revenue maximizing thing for it to do? The revenue maximizing thing, it turns out, is to add the 2 side edges. So this would give revenue 1 plus epsilon, strictly higher than the middle case, but only welfare 1 plus epsilon. So taking epsilon to 0, what we see is that the price of revenue maximization is in fact bounded below by 2. That there exists a market in which the platform acting as revenue maximizer achieves welfare just 1/2 of the welfare that would have been achieved if the platform acted as a welfare maximizer. Right, so there are in fact cases where these incentives are misaligned, but things can't get too bad. It turns out that the price of revenue maximization is bounded above by log of the minimum number of buyers and sellers. And the general intuition for this result is as follows. So if there ever existed a set of platform edges that added a lot of welfare, the platform optimal graph, right? Then the conversion procedure we described before would actually allow us to convert this into revenue. And so in some sense, right, if the distance between the welfare optimal graph and the platform optimal graph were ever too big, right, then this convergent procedure would give us strictly more revenue than we would have gotten from our supposedly platform optimal graph. Right, so this convergent procedure allows us to sort of keep these two parties connected together. So that gives us two bounds of the price of revenue maximization, a lower and an upper bound. And in fact, we conjecture that our lower bound is tight. The price of revenue maximization is actually precisely equal to 2, but we leave this as sort of an interesting open problem for you guys. Finally, we'll turn to considering some stronger results with homogeneous goods. So what are homogeneous goods? What do I mean by this? Well, consider sort of a market where all the goods are milk and they're all the same. Right? So no lactose-free milk, no almond milk, just 2% milk. And I sort of might have a different valuation for milk than you do, but I don't care which milk I buy. I'm happy with any of the milks equally. And so, I have the same valuation for all the sellers. So it turns out that in this class of markets, you can actually get significantly stronger guarantees. Firstly, the platform can obtain the full welfare increase delta W in polynomial time while maximizing welfare. So before we only got a logarithmic fraction, now we get the full thing. And this, as a corollary, gives us the constant factor approximation algorithm for revenue, again, in initially inefficient homogeneous good markets. And then secondly, it turns out that in this class of markets, the incentives for welfare maximization and revenue maximization are precisely aligned in the sense that even when the platform maximizes for revenue, we're guaranteed optimal. Right. So in this case, I can really promise you this 100% guarantee without. So just wrap things up. Right. Some final takeaways. What did we do? Well, we modeled the decisions that face the platform when trying to match users together in the presence of an existing market where some transaction opportunities were already possible. We showed that maximizing revenue is computationally intractable, but then we gave a logarithmic approximation algorithm to our revenue when markets were initially inefficient. Finally, we bounded the effect of platform incentives on welfare and showed that revenue maximization can't hurt social welfare by too much. And we concluded by getting significantly stronger results in markets where we have homogeneous goods. Some future directions that we're interested in working on will firstly develop better or more general approximation algorithms for revenue maximization. We want to close the gap between the lower and upper bounds for the price of revenue maximization, hopefully resolve the conjecture that's equal to 2. And finally, we might consider modeling the incentives facing sellers due to platform fees in the light of Gary's work if you were here to see it. Or consider modeling uncertainty surrounding the world graph. So what happens when the platform isn't perfectly certain about buyer valuations or doesn't have complete information about which transaction opportunities are already available? That's it. Thanks so much.